We're going to talk about the drivetrain, these Honda ATVs, and specifically when you should or should not be in four-wheel drive, as well as what being in four-wheel drive does to the handling of the machine. So to start out with, the rear differential on these is a spool. This means that this wheel and this wheel will always turn the same number of times. If I were to put a dot of paint here and a dot of paint here, then those dots will always line up. The front end is not set up that way. It has what's called an open differential. An open differential is something like this, where one wheel can spin independently of the other. That means that you can turn. The reason that helps you turn, this hand cart's going to help us demonstrate. If I'm turning to the left here, this is exaggerated, you can see that the right wheel has to spin at a different speed than the left wheel. If these wheels were locked together, it would be very difficult to turn. On the Hondas that have lockers, those are located right there. It's a black switch that you flick upwards. That will lock your two front wheels together, just like the back wheel. That means that when you try and turn, these wheels cannot spin at different speeds. That means that to make up for that lack of spinning, one wheel has to slide on the ground. Now naturally, because the tires are quite grippy, especially when there's a lot of weight on them, those handlebars are going to become rather stiff to turn. So for that reason, if you're on hard ground with good traction, you don't want your locker turned on. Now, that's simple enough. When should you use four-wheel drive in your quad? Well, the same thing applies. If you think about your front axle and your rear axle, then the concept of going around the corners and the front end, I'm getting muddled up here. Now, hold on a minute. Since this is an open differential, how does it make the machine go forwards? Well, when you put the machine into four-wheel drive, your drive shaft, that little shaft that goes forward, starts spinning in your front differential, which is that metal case in there. That metal case takes rotation this way and turns it into rotation this way. In a perfect world, it'll split the rotation 50-50 between each wheel. That means that this wheel will turn once and this wheel will turn once. If I'm going around a corner, it'll allow the wheels to spin at a different rate and let me corner. We're clear on that. Now, what if we have good traction here, but this wheel's in the mud or up in the air? What's going to happen is, because there's less resistance to this wheel is going to start spinning while this wheel will remain staying still. That's going to do two things. Number one, you're not going to move because you're getting no traction. Number two is you're going to start building up heat inside your differential because there are these little itty-bitty gears that are not meant to spin that fast. So you don't want to spin mercilessly because you're going to be heating up your differential, heating up the oil in there, wearing it out quicker. The other risk is if this tire all of a sudden catches traction, then this shaft in here is going to be under a lot of stress. Inside these little rubber boots are CV joints. CV joints are prone to breaking when put under sudden load by a tire catching traction. So, to summarize, if one wheel's spinning and the other's not, you need to engage your front locker if it has one, or you need to get both wheels back in contact with the ground. Now, when should you use four-wheel drive versus when should you use two-wheel drive? The same concept applies as the lockers, kind of, in that the more traction you have, the less tires you want to have spinning. If I'm on something like this, bare concrete floor, I have lots of traction, so I'm going to have my machine in two-wheel drive. That's going to help me turn. It's also going to use less fuel and wear the machine out less. Now, Ben, how does it help you turn? Well, what's going on is as you turn, these tires, both of them, are going to spin more times than these tires. That's just due to the nature of how you go around a turn. I drew a little picture over here. Don't know if it'll show up very well. But as I go around a turn, this would be my front axle, and this would be my back axle. That means that if both wheels are trying to spin the same number of times, then you're going to have what's called drivetrain windup. Drivetrain windup is bad, puts extra stress on components, and it makes it harder to steer. So anytime you have traction, be in two-wheel drive. If I was in mud, if I was in snow, if I was going up a steep, loose hill, that's when I'd be in four-wheel drive. The four-wheel drive system, in this case, is a part-time four-wheel drive. What that means is that there's no slipping action between the rear axle and the front axle. That means that you have a drive shaft, which you can kind of see if you look in that hole, that goes to the front. You have a drive shaft, which you can see back there. It's this thing that spins your back axle. Now, because those two axles are linked together, if I use the brakes to brake the front wheels or the rear wheels, it's going to go through that drivetrain and brake the other ones. That means that if I'm in four-wheel drive, in order to not prematurely wear out my brakes, I'm going to use both brakes, my front and my rears.